Next, we're going to talk about slope of a linear equation. Slope is a number that describes the steepness of a line. So, in order to find out what the formula is, I'm going to take just 2 points and we're going to do a little bit of a discovery activity. And let's just say that there are only 2 random points here. We will call this first one x1, y1, and the second one we'll call x2, y2. The little 1 and the little 2 just represent, hey, I'm the first x, or I'm the second x, or first y and second y. So this point is x1, this point is x2, and this point will be y1, and this point right about here will be y2. So I want to know what the steepness of this line is, and I need a number that represents the steepness of a line. So clearly this is going uphill, and I want to know exactly what rate is it going uphill. So if I think about this as its vertical components and its horizontal components, I know that if I'm going from this first point to the second point, I have to rise some and move forward some, which we usually call run. We rise the red part and we have to run the blue part. If this is a mountain side or a hillside and I'm at point x1, y1 and I need to get to point x2, y2, I need to raise myself the red unit, the red distance, and move myself the blue distance. And obviously when you're walking up a hill, you go both at the same time, go over a little bit and up a little bit. But if we're just looking at the horizontal and the vertical components, it creates this little right triangle here. So I want to know, what is the distance that you are rising? What is this distance here? Well, it's the same distance that's between these two numbers, right? That red and that red are the same distance. I'm just moving it to the y-axis. Well, when I ask students what the distance between y1 and y2 is, they have a hard time with that. But what if I asked instead, let's say this was 5 and this was 3. What's the distance between them? Everyone shouts 2. Easy. How'd you get 2? Well, I take the top one minus the bottom one, the 5 minus 3. There's 2 units between 5 and 3. Okay, well, let's take off those numbers because I just made up those numbers. Now, and ask the same question again. What's the distance between y1 and y2? Well, you take the second one and you subtract the first one, and that gets you the distance. Same on the blue. What's the distance of the blue? Well, the distance of the blue is the distance between x1 and x2. I just moved the blue line here down to here, and I want to know what's the distance between x1 and x2. Again, people have a hard time with that. What if I told you that this one was 3 and this one was 8? What's the distance between 3 and 8? And students will always say, oh, 5, that's easy. Well, what if I took off the numbers? What did you do to get 5? You took the second one minus the first one. So this distance right here is just x2 minus x1. So we have to rise y2 minus y1, and we have to run x2 minus x1. And the slope formula turns out to be the ratio of the rise and the run. We use the letter m to represent that. Slope is always used with the letter m. Not my rule, it's just what we do. And what we're going to do is take the ratio of the change of y over the change of x, which another way we say that is rise over run. Rise over run. How far did you rise in red versus how far did you run? So my formula, if I use x1 and y1 and x2 and y2, is going to be y2 minus y1 from the red distance divided by x2 minus x1 from the blue distance. Now this is super important. You want to definitely write this down, maybe box it or put stars by it or something, because that's going to be your slope formula. Another way you might want to remember that is rise over run. Now, slope not only describes the steepness, but it also describes the direction. So let's go through the types of slope. we have some slopes that go uphill, some slopes will go downhill, some slopes are flat and horizontal, and some slopes are straight up and down. So if the slope is going up and to the right, we call that a positive slope, like you're going uphill. And down, that is going to be called a negative slope. So if like you were skiing, if you were trying to go uphill on the skis, there's your skis. You're going uphill, you're on the slope, but you're going uphill. This is the fun part when you're on a skis. Skis, because you know that we call them the slopes when you're skiing. So are you on the slopes when you're going uphill? Yes. Are you on the slopes when you're going downhill? Yes. This is the fun one, right? Yay. How about the flat line? This slope is called zero slope. If you're skiing, can you still ride on this slope? And the answer is yes, you can. That's just called cross-country skiing, okay? When you're just going on a flat surface. But you can still actually ski on that slope, right? How about the vertical line? We call this an undefined slope. Okay? Can you ski on this slope? Well, the answer is no. You're not actually skiing here. This would be falling because this is like a cliff, okay? You're like, you still got your skis on, but you're falling. Okay, so there's no slope here at all. And in fact, it's undefined slope because you can't even actually ski on this. You can ski uphill, you can ski downhill, you can ski horizontally, right? So there is such thing as a positive slope and a negative slope and a zero slope, okay? But the one you can't ski on is undefined because it's a vertical line. It's not actually a slope, it's more of a cliff of your mountain, okay? So those are the 4 types of slopes. So I want you to identify the slope of the following graphs. Now clearly this one is going uphill, the first one, so I know that it is a positive slope. But more importantly, what is the slope? Okay, so what I need to do is I need to look and find 2 points on your graph that are nice, neat points that cross at intersections so that I can count. We said the slope is the rise over the run. So all I have to do here is count how far up I'm going versus how far over I'm going. So how far am I rising? I'm just going up 1 and I'm running 1, 2, 3. So my slope is 1/3. Now technically you could have picked 2 different points. Let me just show you that. You could have picked maybe, I don't know, this point right here and this point right here. You could rise 2 and run 6 instead of rising 1 and running 3. And you're like, wait, that's going to get you a different answer. Well, no, it's really not. Because if you have a rise of 2 and a run of 6, doesn't that still reduce to 1/3? So no matter what you do, your slope's still going to be 1/3. On the next problem, I see a nice good point right here. And another one right there. Okay. Again, those aren't the 2 you have to choose, but those are the 2 that I happen to see. So I want to rise some and I want to run some. Okay, so how far am I rising? Well, if I start from my actual point, I'm going down 1, 2, 3, 4. If I'm rising down 4, how would you write down 4 for your rise? Well, it would be -4. If you're running 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, when I reduce that, that gets me -2/3. Again, if I pick 2 other points, it will still reduce to 2/3, -2/3. Another pat yourself on the back moment is we knew that this slope was going downhill, so my slope should be negative. And just finding a rise in the run happened to already turn out to be negative. On the next one, I may have already memorized that a horizontal slope is a zero slope. This is that cross-country skiing that we were talking about. But let's pretend you got to the exam and you forgot, okay? But you remembered rise over run. So if I still pick 2 points here, how far did you rise to get from one point to the next? Well, I rose nothing, 0, and I ran 1, 2, 3. So when you reduce that, you still get 0. So either memorize that it's a 0 slope and then just be done with it, or if you rise and run, you're still going to get 0. Again, this is one of those that you might have memorized. All vertical lines have undefined slopes. You could have just memorized that, but let's pretend that you forgot. Just in case on the exam you do forget and you're like, I don't remember. If you pick 2 points, any 2 points, how far did you rise to get from one point to the next? 1, 2, 3. It looks like I rose 4. How far did you run? Well, 0. I didn't run left or right any. So what's 4 divided by 0? Don't say 0. Any number divided by 0 is undefined. So either you memorized it and you knew that a vertical line should have an undefined slope, or you use your rise over run and you still get undefined slope. So for more practice for slope, I rewrote the formulas up here at the top of the paper so you didn't have to keep flipping over. It says find the slope of the lines passing through the following points using the slope formula. Okay, so this time we don't have a picture. And because we don't have a picture, either you have to draw a picture and then count, or we can use the slope formula, which I think is a little bit easier if you don't already have a picture. Now, if you have a graph already, counting is real simple, but I don't really want to draw a graph just to get the slope. So I'm going to label each of these points x1, y1, x2, y2. Remember that x1 just means hi, I'm the first x. y1, the little 1, just means hi, I'm the first y. And x2 is the second x, and y2 is just the second y. The most critical part of this whole process is that you get the correct x2, y2, x1, y1 in the right spot when you're plugging it in. I know you all can subtract fairly simply, but plugging in the right values in the right spot is usually one of the biggest mistakes students make on this one. So my formula says y2 minus y1. Who is my y2 here? Let me go ahead and just write it out one more time. So notice that there's minuses in the formula. Who's my y2? y2 is 4 minus the blue minus there because there's a minus in the formula. y1, which is 0. Then I have x2, which is 0, minus because there's a minus in the formula, x1, which is 7. When I simplify here, I'm getting a 4 minus 0, which is 4. 0 minus 7 is negative 7, so my slope is negative 4/7, which tells me already that it should be going downhill. Okay, again, x1, y1, x2, y2. I'm going to write out my formula. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. You will need to memorize this formula, so you might consider writing it out in every single problem. After you write it out that many times, hopefully you'll have it memorized. My y2 happens to be 9 this time, minus because there's a minus in the formula. y1 happens to be negative 5. So the blue minus comes from the formula, the red minus comes from the negative on the 5. In the denominator, I have x2, which is 1, minus the blue minus because there's a minus in the formula, negative 2. When we subtract a negative, it's like add a line, change the sign. So it's like really adding a positive, which gets me 9 plus 5 or 14 in the top, and 1 plus 2 is 3. So my slope is 14 thirds. Notice that's a positive, so I already know that the line is going uphill without even drawing it. Again, be sure to label your x1, y1, x2, y2. Write your formula out so you start memorizing it. So y2 happens to be negative 5. The blue minus because there's a minus in the formula, again negative 5. x2 is negative 1 minus because there's a minus in the formula, 3. Then when I simplify in the top, I'm getting add a line, change the sign, 0. Negative 5 plus 5 is 0. Negative 1 minus 3 is negative 4. So 0 divided by negative 4 is 0. 0, if you take 0 things, divide it into 4 groups, you'll have 0 in each group. You're allowed to take a 0 and divide it by a number other than 0. You're just not allowed to divide by 0. So, last example here. y2, which is 5, minus, the blue minus because there's a minus in the formula, y1, which happens to be negative 2. x2, which is 7, the blue minus because there's a minus already in the formula, x1, which happens to be 7. So when I simplify, I add a line, change the sign, that gets me 7 over 0. Now that is a problem. We can't take 7 items and divide it into 0 groups. If you take 7 things and try to put it into 0 groups, you can't. You have at least 7 things. You have to put them in a group. You can't divide it into 0 groups. That's just not defined. So in this case, M is undefined, which is going to be a vertical line. Just to remind you about 0 divided by negative 4 versus 7 divided by 0. If the 0 is on top, the answer is 0. If the 0 is on the bottom, it's undefined. I have a little mantra there. It says, if the 0 is under the line, it's undefined. If the 0 is under the line, it's undefined. So hopefully that helps you to remember.